Okay. Hi, Christin. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So everyone who is tuning in, I have a guest with me today, and I have Christin, who is a somatic sex coach, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So we have some cool questions for you today, and just want to learn about you and what you do and the stuff you preach and how you work with clients. So I guess first off, can you tell us what somatic means and a little bit about the work you do, if you summed it up
Sure.
for us?
Yeah, I mean, the easiest way to think about somatic is body based, something that is experienced in the body. When someone says that they had a somatic reaction or they're holding somatic X, Y, and Z, they're talking about a reaction that's actually happening and expressing through your body.
Hmm.
So as a somatic sex coach, I am different than a therapist per se, where, talk therapy would be something that is very cerebral and something that is, you go back and forth, and a lot of it takes up a lot of mental capacity. And I focus with bringing a head-based awareness down into the body. And so I also practice something called somatic experiencing, which is a body-based trauma resolution technique. So I work primarily with women and femmes who typically have experienced some form of sexual trauma in their past that is keeping them from authentically expressing from a place of power and their own erotic desire. Typically they come to me for the bad sex, but it's always about something else. And so I work with them utilizing this among a lot of other modalities to help them achieve sexual liberation and freedom.
Amazing. So you said that you work primarily with women. Do you work with men at all?
I work with men in a capacity, typically with their female partner. So and that's not something until now, that's not something that I have offered widely. It's more women I've worked with and have a relationship with. If I've worked with them for 6 months, a year, and they're ready to they need me to say the thing in the way that only I could say it. And they will bring in their partner who is willing, and I will be able to support them through a series of sessions, almost to bring them up to speed. It's like integration. It's a deeper level of the work I've already done with my female client, is to bring the male client along. But I also work with clients who may not be a cis female, but may identify with their feminine energy or as a female.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, great. And so did you mean that that primarily clients, their women, are coming to you because they're having dissatisfying sex, but you're finding that the majority of it is trauma, or do they know that they have had trauma and they're coming to you to work through that?
Yeah, it's a mixture. I have a lot of women who come to me because after engaging with my content on Instagram or listening to my podcast, it has occurred to them that perhaps what they're experiencing is related to a past experience that they've had. But other times it'll be, hey, I am dissatisfied with the sex that I'm having with my partner. I am bored. I feel like my libido is broken. I had a baby and I feel lost in my body. I want to have sex, but I don't. That's a lot of the thing that I hear commonly. And then we'll go through a process that I have coined shame mapping, which sounds scarier than it is. Where in the beginning, and I'm like, I go back and forth on whether I should call it something else, but I like to call things what they are. Essentially, I help them get a bird's eye view of all of the experiences they've had from beginning in their very formative years around sexuality, body, pleasure, desire, and whether there was shame involved, whether through their family of origin, through religious upbringing, societal, patriarchal conditioning. Was there an element of shame or being shut down, or, another trauma like a boundary violation or something like that. And typically that stage of our work together is when things will come up, and then we play a big game of connect the dots, and I'm able to help pull on threads and notice what stories were developed during this time through these events that took place, how that has impacted them, and how it is still impacting them in the way they show up in their body, in their relationships, in their sexual dynamics today.
Yeah. Okay. So, so this is so funny, but I see you as so shameless. And shameless is something that has such a negative connotation, right?
Right.
Like we call someone shameless and we're like, oh, that's horrible.
Yeah, she's shameless. Look at that mini skirt. She has no shame.
Right. And you really, you were just like in that in such a beautiful way. And so how did you get to be there?
Well, that's a big question. And I also think that, so funnily enough, my LLC is Shameless Woman LLC.
Is that right?
And I love it is. And the women who work with me one-on-one, when they graduate, they become members of the Shameless Woman Society. So this is something that I'm very intentional about, is reclaiming the meaning of that word. And I mean, shameless literally means without shame. And a woman without shame is a free woman. So yeah, I don't care what other people mean by that, but we're taking that one back for us.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think really it's I'm trying to think of what's the most relevant part. I believe that I reached this level of freedom because so much of my childhood and my early formative years were spent watching someone who wasn't free. And I was born, into a home to a mother who had her own an incredibly traumatic past, of sexual nature, every type of abuse that you can imagine. I work with so many women with so many different woundings and series of traumas. And to this day, a lot of them are not as severe or, and we don't compare trauma, but you know what I'm saying? Like a lot of them, what my mother sustained for her entire early life was just the most horrific thing that most people could think of. And so that was something that I came into my field of awareness when I was around 8, but I didn't, of course, I didn't have any context. I didn't understand what half of it meant. I just knew that I was given too much information at my age as a way of explanation for her behavior and for the things that were happening. And so, looking back through the lens of someone who has made this their profession and their life work, I can see that she was someone who spent a lot of time dissociated and somebody who also experienced a lot of nervous system trauma trigger activations on a regular basis. And I was a contributing factor to that. She experienced so much trauma at an early age that she had suppressed and shut it down and forgotten about it. And then when I was born, I was the first female child born to her, the first daughter. My brother came, and then I came 2.5 years later. And I essentially was born a living, breathing trigger. And then every milestone, every age I hit, like I was her or what she was supposed to be or supposed to have or X, Y, and Z. So that created a very complicated dynamic, but what it did was I was just front row to someone's, deep ongoing pain, a cycle of pain that no matter what they did, they couldn't seem to get out of. Wow. And just this, this desire for freedom and just this sense from my view that she was imprisoned by her trauma and her pain. And, I won't spend too much more time on that because that's her story and her experiences and all of that. But that did, shape me and impact me as she was my primary caretaker. And so I just think I had that awareness really early on. And then also being born in the South in the Bible Belt, I was one of her responses to her own trauma was to raise me in the church and in purity culture, which was very interesting. Obviously that came from a place of fear and a desire for me to never know the horrors that she had endured or to experience kind of the shadow side of sex and trauma and abuse and, all perversion and all of those things. And I think her answer to that was to keep me away from it, as far away from it as possible, which makes sense. I completely understand that. And yet I was born, if anybody, I'm sure anyone who tunes into you is aware of probably like Enneagram and, some of those things. So like I'm an Enneagram 8. And if anyone doesn't know what that is, that's the challenger. So that was challenging for my mom and for me and for everybody else, all other authority figures in my life. You were actually one of the people who gave me the best language. It was like words that I knew in my body, but had never heard or been able to like pull together when you did my reading, when you did my HD reading a couple of years ago. And you said that I was born with this innate sense of wisdom. Like, I don't always know how I know things. I just know them. And that has been true my whole life. Like when you said that, that was something that took me right back to being 8. And hearing a Sunday school teacher or my mom or somebody tell me something, and my immediate reaction in my head was, I don't think that's true. Or like, or no, or like, that's not true for me, or that doesn't make any sense. You know, I would argue with it, you know, even if I didn't do it out loud, which I often did, in my head, I'd be like, yeah, that's not right. Like, that doesn't quite land for me. Wow. And so much of the teaching, you know, of the church, at least the one that I was in, and for anyone who's not familiar with kind of the Western religion, purity culture craze, is essentially this belief that a woman's virginity, purity, like that's her currency with the divine. Like, it connects you, it makes you worthy of a husband and a good life and all these things. And basically all of your worth and your contributions and your spirituality and your divinity is all tied up in your ability to preserve your virginity and save it for your husband, who you get married to and that God picks for you. And there's a lot of problems with that. And there's a lot of damaging aftermath that comes with teaching young girls that, which is something that I also address in my practice with my clients. A lot of the women that I work with, their trauma is actually religious in nature, because it's a very disempowering story to be told that from day one, nothing about you is actually for you. And in a sense, you don't belong to yourself. Like, you come out and your job is to be good and to be quiet and to be pretty and to not be too much of this, but not be too little of this, and save yourself, and your pleasure isn't for you. Don't touch yourself. Don't explore yourself. Don't explore with other people. Like, one day your virtue is the most important thing about you, and it's meant to be given to someone else. So spend your whole life holding on to it so that you can give it away one day. And what we are left with often is a belief that our pleasure isn't for us. So we go into relationship not expecting to enjoy it, not expecting that our needs will be met, not understanding that that's a possibility, not knowing what we like and what feels good, or how our individual body functions, because we aren't given the space to experiment or to explore in a healthy way. And we're, you know, kind of put off of that and discouraged from doing that. And then, you know, going into marriage and being expected to show up and be a porn star and be able to give your husband that God picked for you, like, immaculate blowjobs and have multiple orgasms and like do all these things. Right. You spent all of these years shrouded in shame. Disconnected from your sexuality, disconnected from your natural urges and your desire. And people wonder why we all have such a fucked up view of sex and sexuality. It's like the thing that's the most forbidden, but the thing that's the most like inaccurately described all over. Yeah. And it's such an interesting dichotomy. And so obviously growing up in that, I rejected that very early on. That was one of the biggest things when people started preaching that from the pulpit. I was like, yeah, I don't resonate with this. This does not make sense to me. I remember being given the book, I Kissed Dating Goodbye by Joshua Harris, who at the time of writing it was a 21-year-old virgin who has since gone on to apologize to the human race for putting that out there, has like completely recalled it. He's like, if I could recall it, I would. Like he is no longer, he does not identify with any of that anymore. Amazing. But that was what people were passing out in youth group. And it was like, I'm like, this is a guy who's never had sex, who's never been in a relationship, who's never done any of these things, who's counseling teens across America on on what they should be doing. And it was just ridiculous. It was completely and absolutely ridiculous. So I'm getting sidetracked a little bit, but I think overall, that's great. I think, but the reason I bring that up is because that was one of those moments where I'm like reading through this and I'm like, yeah, I am not gonna do that. He was talking about how, you should save your first kiss for marriage because that makes it even more special. And I think at the time I was reading it, I was probably 16 and I was like, like I'm down for saving virginity or whatever. I will wait on penetration, but like kissing, I'm like, no, I'm definitely gonna make out with people before I get married. Like that was a conversation I had with myself. I was like, I will be doing that. I was like, this is some nonsense. That's too far. That's too much.
Yeah.
We're not gonna do that. So I think as I'm going through all of this is my personal experience. I had my own set of rules. I was like, this feels like too much and ridiculous. I don't agree with these parts. I don't believe this about myself. I don't want this for myself. And I've never known anything different. And I don't know anyone who's doing anything different. And so I had this kind of like system worked out with myself where it's like, I am not going to do, which is hilarious. Is, as I say, I have it worked out with myself. This is what every evangelical teen has worked out with themselves, right? It's like, I'm going to do these things
right,
and repent every Sunday, but it's not like the worst one. So as long as we don't do the worst one, the evangelical teen's favorite game is everything but.
Yeah.
We are going to do everything but penetrative sex because there is a difference and God definitely cares. So that, I was playing that game, got engaged, which led me to get engaged at 19, which I think if you studied, you would notice that in small towns where abstinence only sex education and purity culture prevails, there is a slew of very premature early marriages where kids in their 19s and 20s get married because they have hot pants and they want to have sex and not go to hell.
Right.
So I got engaged at 19 and ended up, going a little too far one night during everything but game and ended up having sex with my boyfriend, who I immediately was overwhelmed, even though I had all of this stuff in my head and all of my thoughts and ideas about what was right and what was wrong. I felt so overwhelmed by shame that I was like, I am not, like, I'm done. I can't go back to church because I've seen how they treat people. Like, no matter what they say, I've seen how they treat girls who they know are sexually active or who got pregnant outside of wedlock or, all of these things. I'm like, I am not interested in that. And so that was like my spiritual rupture moment when my deconstruction started, was actually when I had sex with my boyfriend. And we then got engaged very quickly. And I was like, oh, it's fine though, because we're engaged. So I'll only have sex with he's still the guy I'm marrying. So it's almost like only a half thing. It's not like it's a half sin, right? It's not a whole sin.
Right.
It's a half sin because that's the dumb kind of shit that you tell yourself when you're like grown up in this structure.
Right.
And you're like always bargaining. You're like, God, this is like a little bit bad, but not as bad as this. So like, I think I'm okay. At the end of the day, hopefully I'll still get in, right? Hopefully all my tabs still equal me getting into the pearly gates. Right. It feels so funny because I'm so far removed from that, like over a decade later, that it's hilarious. And if you realize there's a huge world out there where people don't believe any of that and they don't get taught that from birth. And you're like, oh shit, like that sounds nuts. Like when you say it out loud to a person who isn't totally steeped in that, it sounds crazy because it is. Yeah. I'm being very clear on I am not knocking the entire institution of spirituality and religion. I'm a very spiritual person, but the patriarchal Western like religion that I came up with, I will knock the shit out of that all day because it is toxic and harmful to lots of people. So anyway, I got engaged to this guy strictly because of the fact that I felt like I needed to marry him to like make my soul okay and to save myself from hell. And then realized that he was a horrible human being and I wasn't going to be able to go through with it. And that's really when I was like, well, that was my one ticket to make this thing that I did kind of okay. So I'm going to throw all of it out and I'm going to go on what I call my sexual liberation tour. And that's when I was like, well, if I don't believe in that and I don't go there and I don't do that, then like, what is the reason anymore for me not to do all of this? So I basically went out and had a lot of empowered consensual sex and explored my desire and what I like and, like had a rip roaring good time, which actually in the 5 healthy stages of sexual development, which is something that I learned from my mentor, Morgan Cecil, and it comes from a lot of different work, but essentially there are, 5 healthy developmental stages, and the developmental stage for like your early 20s is all about pleasure. It's all about learning what you as an individual need and what you like. It's about learning how to communicate your desires and your boundaries. And it's something that is very healthy and natural, but that so few, if any, of us ever were actually taught. And it was never presented as something that was right on schedule and was supposed to be happening. And so most women especially spend their entire early 20s battling the urge to do that because it's natural and innate. And then feeling shame and guilt about it because we've been told that we're not supposed to want or do any of those things, or we're slutty. And so a lot of us go and do what we're going to do anyway, because hello, like that strongest urge is going to win. And we write it off as our slutty years, when I consider that one of the most empowering moments in my personal development was during that season. And so a lot of what I like to focus on too in my work is going back and revisiting the stages that most of us didn't have. And that was not at all part of the operation of our parents, and kind of reclaiming each of those stages as adults.
Wow.
And being able to reintegrate those moving forward, so that when you didn't get those, you can kind of go back for that and understand your behavior a little bit better, and understand, like, if I didn't get to experience, stage 1, which is all about purity and having no sexual context, and like being able to just explore sensation in my body without knowing any of that. And then like the second stage is curiosity and modeling and role playing, which is why little kids play doctor, which is also totally appropriate for their age. And and then the third one is all about honor and teaching responsibility when your body is able to create life, and talking about that, and just being empowered with information instead of beat over the head with shame about what's going on. Like, what a different outcome would we have? And so all of this kind of mixed into this soup of my life experience that eventually led me to where I am today, which is like, if we just had an overview of how everything was supposed to be happening, and we realized that all the stuff we're feeling and all the things we're curious about and all the things we want to know are all normal and healthy and good things, like, what would we be able, like, what kind of brain space might we have for solving world hunger and, peace, and taking care of our orphans and widows and everybody. I think it's so important. I think it's the thing that so many of us are missing. And in this space of self-development and self-healing, we're constantly challenged and asked to re-examine our limiting beliefs about money and about business and about health and about all these things. And yet most of us are carrying around the first edition of our beliefs about sex and pleasure and sexuality. And that's the one that doesn't get brought up for renewal. That's the one that doesn't get revisited or renegotiated. And yet it's one of the most fundamental ones that impacts us on every level.
Yeah. I kind of wanted to ask you about that. Do you think that's just like purely, it's just shame? Like, that's why we don't bring it up. That's why we don't question it. Do you think it's that? Is it just all the taboos around sex?
I feel like it's like nuance. It's shame. Yes. But it's shame, and it's about power. Like, it's a power dynamic. It's a currency. Like, so much of the way that our system and our hierarchy and everything is set up is based on access and who gets to have what. And for so long, like, men are the ones who have power. They're the ones who get to have the sex they want, when they want, with whom they want. They're the ones with access to money. They're the ones with, all of the access. And sex is part of that. And so for so many years, that was the sole reason. I was like, oh, well, if we can keep her in the house and in the chastity belt and burdened down with babies and all the things, not to say those aren't wonderful. I have a baby. Right. But it's, what I mean? It's like, let's keep her in her place, let's trade her for land and have her take our name and do all these things and keep her legally bound to us so that she cannot flourish as a force on her own. She's not autonomous physically or financially. Then that makes things much easier. That keeps everything kind of chill. And so then as we're trying to overcome that, that's, yes, that's old and we've made so much progress and that's great. But as we've tried to fight that and overcome that, it's so strong and it's so old and it's so ancient. That's when the shaming comes in, because I'm going to sidestep for a second. some of the most dedicated upholders of the patriarchy are actually other women.
Mm-hmm.
And that is because they have been told that if they play by the rules, they will be kept safe. It's all about safety. Everything's about safety.
Yeah.
And when they see another woman challenging the status quo, they feel that their safety is being threatened by this woman, and that it is their job to go and shame their ass and get them back in line.
Right.
And so a lot of times you will see women shaming other women before you will see men shaming other women. Mm-hmm. And so it's all about shame and it's all about power.
Yeah. That makes total sense. So another thing I really wanted to ask you about, and you've touched on this somewhat, but I wondered if you could tell us what is the mother wound and how does this come into your work?
So the mother wound is something that I personally came upon. I know it's much older than that, right? It's like, there's nothing new under the sun. I truly believe that. So, you know, everybody's work has been informed by everybody else's work. And so I first came in contact with it a couple of years ago, as I was kind of feeling like my outlook on being a mother myself, which was something I had decided I was not interested in. Mm-hmm. I was feeling like maybe my position on that was changing. I was probably 27, 28, coming into my like Saturn return time, and everything's all churny, and you're trying to figure out who you are and what you actually want, and how much of what you say you want is based on other people. And you're like, well, what do I actually want? So as I was opening that up for renegotiation with myself, I realized that one of my biggest fears around becoming a mother was repeating the dynamic that I had with my own mom. Okay. And so that sent me down the path. And that is when somewhere someone said mother wound. And I was like, I don't even know what that is, but I have it. I have that. Mm-hmm. And that then led me down the road. You know, there was a lot of different like podcasts, people talking about it. And then, oh my gosh, hopefully I can remember. I think Bethany Webster, I want to say. I hope I have her name right. We will get it right for the show notes if you want to include that. Okay. But she wrote one called Healing the Mother Wound, and her work has been incredibly influential and transformative for me. And essentially the mother wound is emotional, physical, spiritual, mental wounding received from your mother in your relationship with your mother that contributes to a core wound, which is a wound that you then react to or out of in every dynamic in your life. And a lot of it can be attached like to your attachment style. Like we normally form our attachment style based on our relationship with our mother. And so then we play that same attachment style out with romantic partners and friends and other people. And the way that it comes into our work is that for women, mothers, grandmothers, the women in their life are the mirror, the first model for what it means to be a woman, for what it means to be in your body, have a relationship with your body, to experience pleasure, to be sexual or not sexual. It's like we learn so many things as children through osmosis. Right. And so much of that comes just from witnessing our mothers. That's who we're looking to. That's who we're wanting. They teach us how to wear our hair and how to eat and how we talk to ourselves and how we allow others to talk to us. And so a lot of this comes into play in sexual relationships because so many of those original beliefs that a woman may carry about her body and her entitlement to pleasure, her ability to have it, her desire, her ability to communicate, all of those things she learned at home from her mom. And she may not have tracked it back that far, but that's typically where it always starts. Yeah. And it's not to say that everything is the mother's fault, but like motherhood is such an impactful role. Like it's, and moms really, they get the shit into the stick, right? It's like for sure. Even everything I've shared so far about the dynamic with my own mom, it is complex and complicated. And yet Like, I don't know how she showed up I have 6 brothers and sisters. So
wow.
knowing the level of trauma she sustained and knowing the limited access she had to resources and to help and to support, the fact that she got up at all during our childhood is incredible. And so, like, that's not amazing. To say that my experience isn't valid and that there wasn't pain and that there wasn't damage caused because of the way she showed up, but the fact that she did that in itself, those are just, they're separate things, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, like, I have this at this stage, I have a very compassionate lens for how all of that happened. And I completely believe that she gave what she had and that she did the best she could with what she had. But moms they get rammed on both ends. It's like, oh, you're the most important person. Also, there's no funding for you and no support for you and no grace for you. And no one actually, like, you're not valid. Although when it comes time to blame somebody for someone's behavior, you're the most valid. It's so fucked up.
Yep. Yep. 100%.
And so that, but that wound follows us around, and what our mothers believed about sex and sexuality and all of that, whether it was like directly communicated or indirectly, that also tends to follow us into our sexual dynamics with ourselves and with partners down the line.
Yeah. Yeah. That's amazing. Would you say that you spend a lot of time on the dynamics that people experience in childhood with their primary caregivers, or is that just something that you kind of keep in mind? How does that come up in your coaching?
It comes up the most because as a somatic body worker, I deal with the nervous system a lot. And there is a huge connection between early childhood development and basically a child learns to self-regulate their system by being in the presence of an adult who knows how to regulate. And so for a lot of children who grow up with parents who do not know how to regulate, they then, like, that result follows them around forever until they have awareness of it and start working on that.
Yeah.
And so it is something that comes up at least once during every conversation I've ever had with every client, because I have to work on every woman's nervous system. We are all in a constant state of nervous system activation, whether, there is some, every woman who comes through my door, literally, or if it's, virtually, is dealing with some activation, whether it is they're either completely frozen or they're in flight or they are it's so, like, social nervous system, that's a totally different thing, but there's like this fawning and appeasing, like people pleasing, like that is actually a trauma response. So there's typically an activation going on the minute they get there. And so I have to start there because it's a foundational piece.
Right. And so with those clients, you're giving them somatic practices because truly that's the best way to relax the nervous system, to calm it down and to regulate it. So that's then your focus was. Do you work with clients for 3-6 months or a year, or?
It kind of ranges.
Okay.
The shortest amount I work with a client is 3 months. And then so far the longest has been a year. Typically what happens, I really love that 6-month space because it's a large enough container to go deep. And I feel like with 3 months, I just feel like I'm like, everyone who's ever done 3 months just doubles it and then it turns into 6. I'm like, so why don't you just do 6? Because actually it's not cheaper to do 3 months and then 3 months. It's better to do 6. So I like having that space because this isn't something that's going to be fixed overnight. People who are coming to me because they're experiencing trauma activations or nervous system activations during sex or around sexual activity, that is not going to go away overnight. That is not something I can probably help you suss out in 90 minutes what the base is or what the primary contributors are. But as far as taking that awareness, because so many of my clients have been in therapy for years. Yeah. So it's not they don't have awareness. They have lots of awareness. So our task is to take that awareness and get the rest of our body on board. It's to convince our body that all the stuff we know in our head is actually true, because your head now has all the awareness, But something I hear all the time is like, well, I know this, but why do I keep doing this? Or why can I not stop doing this? And it's because your body doesn't believe a word that your head is saying.
Right.
And so we have to connect those. For so many women, the safest place for us to be is in our head. We leave our body all the time. And so because the threat level has been so high, both historically and collectively, as well as individually. And so much of what I'm focused on is helping them reconnect with safety, like establishing the nervous system capacity to reconnect with their body from the neck down in a safe way.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. So would you say that you were in this already fairly empowered state when you met your husband, or has this been something that has continued to evolve and grow as you've been in relationship with him? And if so, how did that go? And how has he come to match you and stand up and, meet you where you are?
I love this question. So I will say that I believed that I was in a very empowered state when I met my husband. I was 23 and I was right on the tail end of my liberation tour. It's so funny how just the cosmos and everything works. I slept with someone the night that wasn't him, the night that I met him. And then just through circumstance, whatever, that was the last. I have not slept with anyone since the night I met him, basically. And and we became platonic friends first. Like we hung out for a couple months before we ever hooked up. Like I didn't ever sleep with anyone ever again after I met Mike. And that was not by like design. Or maybe it was, but not my design. It was not by my design. So super interesting, but I was just like kind of coming off of that. Like I was on that, and I was powerful in the way, I guess, that I've always been, which is I have always been able to say what's on my mind. I will tell you if something is not okay with me. I will tell you what I want. Like you don't have to guess. And this is who I am as a person, right? So sometimes I feel like I talk and people are like, oh my God, I wish I could do that. And I'm like, I was born this way. Like,
yeah.
This is not
and that's
because
amazing.
Right. Well, I'm like, this is not because I've done all that, I'm not taking credit beyond the fact that I came out like this. I don't have a problem like being confrontational. So I was powerful in that way. But I think something that we had to revisit several years later is that I really did allow his opinions and thoughts to influence me and to make me feel shame about some of my past. Like he was someone who, because of his own past, I mean, he was 25 too, right? And didn't know shit about shit. So like, he's a 25-year-old guy, like, out of college, a couple years, just figured out a haircut that works for him, like making money, like he did some shot shit, and he was, and it was great. But also he's been raised with the same, on the other end of the same toxic sludge that we have. So men have all of these shitty little stories going on too, that we don't know where they came from or if they make sense. So for him, he like had these beliefs. It came out in weird ways. Like he was uncomfortable. My internet connection is being a little wonky.
Oh, okay.
I want to make sure I'm not like messing up your recording here. Hold on just a second. I'm going to change I caught all this out. I'm just going to change. Make sure your face is again.
There you are.
It was doing so great.
Yeah,
I think so. So guys also have these stories in their heads about how things are supposed to go. So for example, my husband thought that it was not okay with him that I had more sexual partners than he had, which was information that he kind of like coerced out of me. And like 30 plus year old Christin would say, that's none of your business. And you don't owe anyone your sexual past. Anything that feels relevant, anything that you want to share, I believe that is each individual's right to decide what their boundaries are around that. But at the time, it was like, oh yeah, you're supposed to like share everything with each other and figure out like, whether you want to be with this person or not based on all of their past sins. And so, and then my husband being a child of divorce who very much doesn't like surprises, his coping tactic was like, give me all the skeletons in your closet, and then maybe I can decide if I'm going to trust you, if I'm able to trust you. And so he's all about risk analysis. And that is true to this day. Like, he is very much like, give me all the information, I'll make a spreadsheet, and then I'll decide if the risk is worth the reward or whatever, if that's going to happen.
Yeah.
And so that was a little bit of our dynamic where I would I would share things because he like badgered me to, and then he would make me feel bad about them. And then I would like have to take some time and some space. And then I would come back pissed and be like, how dare you? You don't get to do that. It's none of your business. You don't get to have an opinion about this. And so that was an ongoing kind of thing for the first couple of years where, because sometimes it would take me a minute. Like sometimes he would do something and I would feel so bad and I would apologize. And then like a year later, I would be like, you know what? When I think about that, I get pissed off because you had no right to say that or have an opinion. And I would have to go back for another, and he'd be like, you're right. I'm sorry. Like this version of Mike also agrees that was not okay. And so we kind of had to move through that together. And then I think the other dynamic is that I have always brought the high, like I'm the high sex drive partner in our relationship, which is something that I had to normalize because he, like many men, most of the sex education came from porn, and I'm not down on porn. That's another nuanced conversation. I think that visual stimulation is very important. Story, representation, all of that's important, but like make it ethical, know where it's coming from. Probably you're going to have to pay for it. You need to know that people are there consensually, that, that they're being paid well for their work. Like all of that's very important. But porn as a sex education tool is like mainstream porn. That's a mistake. That is bad news bears. Yeah. And so I feel like lots of guys, especially at that point in life, what they know about sex comes from porn. And so there was a lot of me having to re-educate and be like, as the living, breathing vagina in front of you, this is how it works. This is how I work. This is what I need. This is what it takes for me to come. This is what, this is what, it doesn't matter what you saw or what you think. This is what is real for me. And there was definitely a lot of dialogue around that and just kind of breaking down some of those stereotypes. It is completely normal and average for the female partner to have the higher sex drive, but that's not something that we're told either. We're conditioned to believe that women overwhelmingly don't want sex, and we have to be coerced into it, and that men always want sex and will never turn it down, which is also not true. And it also, a lot of it has to do with your desire and your arousal map. It's like what Jaya, who she got it from someone else, but basically like the erotic blueprints, there is a lot of different types of erotic blueprints, which means that what arouses you and gets you going and sustains your desire are different things. And so mine and Mike's erotic blueprint are very different. And so he's the kind of person who I had to face off with my own prejudices and thoughts about all of that too, because I'm like, you're lucky. Like, I want to jump your bones multiple times a day, every day. Like, you don't have to ever come ask me for sex or put me into sex, or like, I will give it to you. And he didn't want it. And I was like, what is wrong with you that you don't want to have sex with me all the time? Yeah. And I realized that like, he is the kind of person who his sex drive tanks when he's stressed out or when he feels anxious about something. Like, he is somebody who his environment really impacts his ability to be like, he's the guy who's like, if something shitty is going on over there, I can't be sexy over here. Whereas I'm just shut all that out and let's just real quick. He's like, I cannot shut it all out. Like, I need everything to be harmonious and fine and like great for me to be here. And so those are the kind of things that we've learned about each other and had to normalize within our relationship over the years. And obviously when I really started deepening into my like path, like this is my work, this is my purpose. So we kind of went through a patch where it was challenging because he felt like he couldn't have sex with me without me analyzing him. He'd be like, I don't find it sexy that I can't come into our bedroom without wondering if you're going to give me a note later or if you're going to like analyze what happened. And so we really had to learn how to everything that I teach is stuff that I have had to learn basically. Yes.
Right.
Because there's so much stuff from my like wild fun years that I could happily share. But really the work comes out when you commit to longevity and you want to keep the fire alive and you want to keep things fun and interesting and you want to keep that attraction and that polarity. That takes work and creativity. That's what actually takes effort, not the other stuff. Like I can show up as whoever I want for one night. Like that's easy. This is the shit that's hard. And so working with this over the years, like letting my needs be known. And I think our work is so different. It's so interesting. Like I empower women to be more open about what they need and to vocalize and verbalize. That's the thing that comes very easy for me. Yeah. So I get to gift other women with that support. Whereas my work is to figure out how to do that in a compassionate way that doesn't belittle or offend or hurt my husband's feelings. It's like, yes, maybe I can say everything that I want that's on my mind. Should I say it that way? Should I, like, is that necessary? Maybe not. And so I've really had to think about how to come in with more of a collaborative energy that says, I love you and I love us and I want us to have really amazing sex. Whereas for so long, I think it was like, you know what would make this better for me is if you did X, Y, and Z, which is not in itself bad. There are moments when that needs to happen. If he is going down on you, you do need to tell him what would make that better for you. That is needed. But just the bigger picture, saying, I want us to connect and thrive and flourish. Here, here are some things that I feel would support us in that. Yeah. And, and just kind of like bringing in more of a collaborative spirit, because Mike is very we-centered. And some of this goes back to our types and our personalities and our profiles, right? I'm very I-centered and that benefits us in lots of ways. And then there are some challenges and downsides to that. Whereas Mike's we approach benefits us in ways, and there are some downsides. Sometimes I'm like, I just want to know what you think. I want to know what you want. I don't really I don't care about what we, the family unit, are doing. I would like to know what Mike wants. Yeah. And so that there's been give and take along the way. So God,
I love that though. Yeah. That just like gives me goosebumps and just warms me up. It's just like, I love
good too. I think
goosebumps. Yeah.
I got those some goosebumps from that. Yeah.
No, it's just like, your vulnerability. And I see how like so much of your power has been in your vulnerability and your willingness to try to be we-centered. Yeah, no, I just love that. Yeah, that's really amazing. Yeah, awesome. Thank you for sharing that. So let's see. Maybe I'll just ask you one more question. And then we'll see if there's anything else you want to share before we go, because this has really been amazing. But what is one single piece of advice or one single mindset that you think most women need to hear, or most men, just people or women, anybody that they need to hear that you find to be the most transformative?
What comes to mind for me is more, it's a truth that I want everyone to see, to be able to see. And that is that your sexuality is more than penis and vagina activity. Like people hear sexuality and they mostly think of sex. And it's something me and my sex coach friends laugh about all the time. It's always about sex. And then it's also not about sex. Like sexuality is your life force. It's your potency. Like, especially for a woman, like it is that force of creativity that comes out of your body, whether you ever decide to have a child or not. It's how you birth businesses. It's how you bring things to life. It's how you manifest your desires in the world. And when you are cut off from your sexuality, you are cut off from your life force, from your vitality. And that's true for all of us. And so having this awareness that it's about so much more than sex. Yes, it greatly enhances and benefits sex, but sexuality as a whole, to tap into the sacredness and the color, and just, I believe that your sexuality is the number one way to get it to authentically express. If you are not in touch with your sexuality, you are not authentically expressing yourself in your fullest multifaceted form. So I think that would be it, because yeah, I mean, we laugh because people will come in and they'll be like, oh yeah, I'm here because I'm bored in sex. And then we will get into it. And 6 months later, they're like, oh my God, like I thought I came here because I was bored in sex. And this is it. Because we end up talking about so many other things. It's like, I never start in the bedroom to address issues with sex. We start in the kitchen and the living room and on the porch, like all the other rooms in the house. Like we don't start in the bedroom. The problem is happening in the bedroom. The source of the problem is probably outside. Yes.
Okay. Beautiful. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. Is there anything that you would love to share or add? Anything that I didn't ask you yet?
I think it is my responsibility to add that pleasure and connection and authentic expression and sexual liberation, all of that is a function of safety. We cannot do that. When people are listening, they're like, oh my gosh, like I wish I could just like try harder and do that. It's not something that you can try harder at. If you're not experiencing the sex that you want to have, if you're not expressing in the way you want to express, if you're not tapped into pleasure, if you can't grasp it and you just don't know why, there's a lack of safety somewhere. And so you're not crazy, you're not broken, just at some point down somewhere, you've been made to feel unsafe, either in your own body, in your relationship, in, you know, wherever you're at, there's been a lack of safety. And so just knowing that, taking in that truth and sitting with that and asking yourself, what do I need to feel safe? Like how much more access would I have to my erotic power and to my pleasure and to my self-expression if I felt truly, truly safe? How can I give that to myself? And if you don't know, then seeking help and seeking support. And that is what I do with all of my clients. And I currently am accepting clients for my winter, spring term. And so the way that I work, because I like to work in that 6-month increment, I'm really, really careful about protecting my energy. And so I don't enroll clients all year long. Basically twice a year, I open up 6 spots, because I also have learned over the last 3 years how many people I can realistically, energetically support with quality and all of my zest at once. And I don't like to work with more than 6 people at a time. So I bring on 6 women for the winter, like January through June. And then I enroll again at the end of June through the end of the year. So I have 4 private coaching spots right now that I am looking for the woman who's ready. Like if you're listening, and it's not even, there's a difference. If it's like, oh my God, this is the first time this has come into my awareness and I feel totally petrified and like frozen in fear, not the time. I am not talking to you. This is like a welcome. You're waking up. Like I will be here when you're ready. More like you're listening and you're like, oh fuck, like I've done everything else and this is the thing. And I know it's the thing. Like send me a DM and we'll have a chit chat about it. We'll do a chemistry call. Getting on the call doesn't mean that you're a yes. It just means that you're curious about what might happen if you actually did this piece, if you actually tapped into this. So I would love to just open the invitation. If you are curious, I would love to talk to you about what it might look like to impact the rest of your life through the doorway of addressing your sexuality.
Yeah. Okay. Amazing. Thank you so much. And we'll put your Instagram handle and your website in the show notes here on the website and on YouTube, so people can find you. And I didn't mention early on, but just in case any of you human design folks out there are curious, Christin is a 6'2". She's a 6'2" generator. And is it right that you're a pure generator? You're the sacral generator, or are you emotionally
I am
defined?
No, I'm a sacral.
Sacral. Okay. That's what I thought. Okay. Yeah. So you can hear all of that juiciness and all of that power and like all of that in you.
It comes from under my belly button.
Yeah. I love it. And it just like me as the projector, the non-sacral, I'm just like, I was exhausted before we were going to chat. And I'm like, I know this woman is going to light me up and I'm going to feel good. And and here I am riding that. So I hope everyone else did.
Yeah. I'm like, and I know we don't have time today, but I do at some point, like this is such a huge tie-in. one of the greatest ahas I had, like if I've been coaching in this way for 3 years, it was probably 2 years ago that a friend of mine gifted me a reading with you. And it was literally life-changing. And I know we've talked about this because we obviously know each other better now since then. But at the time it was like, she was the friend and she paid you to do the reading and you recorded it. Like I wasn't even with you when you did it.
Right.
And I listened to it and it made so many things make sense. Like in the way that the reason that all of us we love quizzes and we love personality profiles, because we all just want to be seen and heard a little more. Right. And,
yeah.
But it truly, human design has been one of the primary, modalities to understanding myself and how I work and just connecting the dots, understanding why I'm so passionate about the things I am. I think it actually offered me so much peace and such a empowering reframe when it came to my relationship with my mom, because there were things in there that were like, this is literally your personality, like stuff that I had grown up believing, kind of the dialogue that had been had around it, which is like, oh, you're headstrong and you're challenging and you're difficult and you're all of these things. I was like, oh no, written into your personality, the fiber of your being is this, and this is the reason for it. And this makes you so good at this. It was like the greatest love letter to myself that I could have ever gotten. And so I just really, if you're familiar with Cameron's work and but have never done a reading, I highly, highly, highly recommend it, because human design, you can get lost in it. It can feel so overwhelming, all of the cross angles and things and like all that. You're like, what does all of this even mean? Like, it's not quite as straightforward as other things. And I think it's that way for a reason. You're meant to have a guide. You're meant to get that lens and that perspective. And it really changed everything for me, for you to reflect some of that back. And I think I shared with you offline that I've gone back and listened to the reading once a year. Like I listen to it once a year at the beginning of a new year. I listen to it, and the things I take away from it each year are so different, which I couldn't have expected. But it's been such an amazing practice to be able to reflect and see how even where I'm at in the grand scheme of my design, like changes, and the where I put emphasis and what's coming up. And it always, always resonates. And it was just the greatest gift. So I thank you. I thank you for your gift and how that has helped me deepen and clarify into my own.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much for saying that. That is so kind of you. Yeah. And I'm so happy to hear that, because that's exactly how I feel about the recorded readings, is that they're really intimate and they're really like kind of impactful, initiating, and they really are there to be revisited and kept up for years. So I'm so glad it served you in that way.
Because once you would be talking in the recording, and we've never met at the time that I listened to it. You're like, now I don't know you at all, but it looks like, and you would say something and I'd be like, well, it sounds like you know me. Sounds like you know me at all.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. It feels really sneaky in that way. I love that. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Christin. I really, really appreciate your perspective and what you're doing for the world and your time. And I can't wait for people to listen to this.
Thank you for having me and trusting me enough to share me with your community. It's a great honor.
Absolutely. Yeah. I really feel your message deeply and your work deeply, and very, very much identify with your message, and your energy is it's very true and powerful and magnetic. So I love it, and can't wait for people to listen.
Thank you. I receive all that. I appreciate you so much.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you too.